Thursday, but there's been really only one story in Washington, D.C. and across the country. There has been an enormous amount of talk, not just this week, but over the last month, about violent extremism and the people who embrace it, the dangerous people. Those people are domestic terrorists, we're told. They must be put down by force. The war on terror has moved stateside. Extremists have breached our walls. They are inside our country. And in response, we must hunt them down. Doing that is existential. Our country depends on it. Our lives depend on it. Now, we're hearing those words nonstop on cable news, but not just on cable news. We're hearing the very same thing from elected officials, including some Republican elected officials. We're hearing it from the leaders of federal law enforcement agencies and of the intelligence agencies. We're hearing it from the Pentagon. Just this week, the new Secretary of Defense ordered the entire U.S. military to, quote, stand down while investigators cleanse the ranks of political extremists. And of course, we're hearing it from the business establishment, from Wall Street and the tech monopolies, from the massive multinational corporations that increasingly control the contours of American life. All of them are now on the hunt for political extremists. And on one level, that does not sound bad, because no sane person is for political extremism, especially violent extremism. We're against it. We're for moderation. We're for incremental change. We're for the consent of the governed. We said that every day for 4 years, and we meant it. We don't like extremists either. We attack them regularly. But it's not enough to be against something. You have to be more precise than that. What is it that you're against? In order to root out a problem, you have to know what it is. You need a sense of what you're looking for. You need a clear sight picture. You have to define the terms. And here's the remarkable thing about this public conversation we're having. No one is doing that. Have you noticed? None of these newly energized and highly empowered extremist hunters have told us exactly what an extremist is. So we're left to guess. We're left to look around nervously to see if we can spot one, hoping against hope the whole time they're not talking about us, are they? And if they are, what exactly are they doing? How are they hunting these extremists they keep telling us about but will not describe? We now know part of the answer to that question. This show has obtained exclusively evidence that Bank of America, the second largest bank in the country with more than 60 million customers, is actively but secretly engaged in the hunt for extremists in cooperation with the government. Bank of America is, without the knowledge or the consent of its customers, sharing private information with federal law enforcement agencies. Bank of America effectively is acting as an intelligence agency, but they're not telling you about it. In the days after the January 6th riot at the Capitol, Bank of America went through its own customers' financial and transaction records, a lot of them. Now, these were the private records of Americans who had committed no crime, people who, as far as we know, had absolutely nothing to do with what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. But at the request of federal investigators, Bank of America searched its databases looking for people who fit a specific profile. Here's what that profile was, and we are quoting. Customers confirmed as transacting, either through bank account, debit card, or credit card, purchases in Washington, D.C. between January 5th and January 6th. Number 2, purchases made for hotels, Airbnb, RSVPs in Washington, Virginia, or Maryland after January 6th. Number 3, any purchase of weapons or at a weapons-related merchant between January 7th and their upcoming suspected stay in the D.C. area around Inauguration Day. And 4, airline-related purchases since January 6th, end quote. So what do you notice about that profile? Well, the first thing you notice is that it's remarkably broad. Any purchases of anything in the city of Washington, D.C., any overnight stay anywhere in the 3-state area that spans hundreds of miles, any purchase, not simply of legal firearms, but instead anything bought from a, quote, weapons-related merchant, T-shirts included, and then any airline-related purchases, not just flights to Washington, flights to anywhere, to Omaha, to Thailand. That is a very, very wide net, an absurdly wide net. Bank of America identified a total of 211 customers who met these, quote, thresholds of interest. And it was at that point, the show has learned, Bank of America turned over the results of its internal scan to federal authorities, apparently without notifying the customers who were being spied upon. Federal investigators then interviewed at least one of these unsuspecting people. And that person, we've learned, hadn't done anything wrong, and in the end was cleared. Imagine if you were that person. The FBI hauls you in for questioning in a terror investigation, not because you've done anything suspicious. You haven't. You bought plane tickets and visited your country's capital. You thought you could do that. You thought it was your country. Now they're sweating you because your bank, which you trust with your most private information of everything you buy, has ratted you out to the feds without telling you, without your knowledge. Because Bank of America did that, you are being treated like a member of Al-Qaeda. What country is this? It doesn't matter how much you despise Donald Trump or how much you believe that hatred of Trump justifies suspending this country's ancient civil liberties. Going through that experience would scare the hell out of you. Absolutely. A terror suspect, you would think? Does anyone else know about this? Is there a record of this interview? Will I lose my job because of it? That actually happened to someone. It's hard to believe it, but it did. We asked Bank of America about this. They confirmed it actually happened by not denying it. Here's their statement in full, which manages to make the whole thing even creepier, assuming that's possible. Quote, "We don't comment on our communications with law enforcement." Well, apparently not. "All banks," it continues, "have responsibilities under federal law to cooperate with law enforcement inquiries in full compliance with the law." End quote. Now, the last part, from a lawyer's perspective, is the essence. In full compliance with the law. It's the law. We had no choice. But that's not true. Bank of America did have a choice. The bank could have resisted turning over information on its innocent customers to federal investigators, but Bank of America did not do that. Nor is it clear, if we're going to be precise about it, that what Bank of America did is even legal. It turns out it's not simple. It's a gray area. We spoke to a number of lawyers about this today. Some of them told us that what Bank of America did might in fact not be legal and could in fact be challenged in court. One knowledgeable attorney pointed us to 12 U.S.C. 3403. That's a federal law that allows banks to tip off the feds to any information that, quote, "may be relevant to a possible violation of any statute or regulation." Now, the DOJ instructs federal agents to remind banks of that law, and of course they do with maximum aggression. But the question is, legally, what constitutes information that may be relevant to a possible crime? Buying a muffin in Washington, D.C. on January 5th? Does that make you a potential domestic extremist? According to Bank of America, yes. Yes, it does. This is the moment when, for the sake of our country and our grandchildren who will live here, we need to pause and breathe deeply, searching for wisdom, avoiding hysteria, and ask, what are the rules? What, for God's sakes, is a political extremist? A lot hangs on that question, maybe everything. Please tell us. But they won't tell us. Pointedly, they won't tell us. Today at the White House, for example, the new National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, told reporters that, quote, "domestic extremism is the urgent crisis of our time. Rooting out domestic political extremism is more important than anything else, more important than getting a job, running your business, tending to your family." But Sullivan did not, again.
So Build Back Better isn't just about economics, it's about national security as well. And then it's about the set of issues that working families in this country are facing every day that are challenging their lives and livelihoods. The pandemic, climate change, the threat of domestic violent extremism.
Domestic violent extremism, there it is, the worst thing. But no sense of what that means. We're starting to believe they're not defining it for a reason. What's the other explanation? Yesterday, an op-ed in the New York Times asked this question. Are private messaging apps the next messaging apps? Signal, a bunch of others. They're encrypted. No one can read it. The New York Times doesn't like this. Why? Because if they can't see what you're saying, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to say it. As the newspaper put it, quote, "The shift to private messaging has renewed a debate over whether encryption is a double-edged sword. While the technology prevents people from being spied upon, it might also make it easier for criminals and misinformation spreaders to do harm without getting caught." Notice, criminals and misinformation spreaders are in the same sentence. They're pretty much the same thing. What's a misinformation spreader? Well, that's someone who doesn't agree with the New York Times, obviously a violent extremist, and they're dangerous. If you think we're joking, we're not. They're pulling this thread every day.